Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. In my over 6 years doing this podcast, having insightful conversations with presidents, trustees, and other higher education leaders, I'm sensing a shift in our conversations. The athletics enterprise is more confusing and complex than ever, and to many, it feels like it is spiraling beyond the scope of our missions. My guest today has been thinking about this too. Todd Dicon is the 13th president at Kent State University in Ohio. Todd is thinking deeply about where athletics is today, where it could be headed, and particularly with the wide range of both athletic budgets and geographical disparities that many campuses face. Todd's leadership is laser focused on student success, access, affordability, and academic excellence. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Karen, and I just want to say that may you lead in interesting times. And, I think a lot about these things. I served for 6 years as the faculty athletics representative for the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And during that period, I also served on the Progress Towards Degree Waiver Committee for the NCAA, and I chaired that committee 1 year. And so I feel like, on the one hand, I know a lot about intercollegiate athletics, but yet with all the changes afoot, I feel like I don't know very much about athletics. So it's an interesting moment for me professionally.
Very much so. Just give our listeners a sense of the landscape that Kent lives in. I mean, everybody knows it's Ohio, it's a state institution, but Ohio as a state is a very complex system of institutions.
Well, we're one of 14 public institutions. Ohio is I suppose every state has its regions, but we're in the northeastern part. We're 38 miles from downtown Cleveland as the crow flies. Northeast Ohio is very different than Central Ohio, which is totally different in economy, customs, culture than Southeast Ohio. So it's really it's a state that's divided up in different regions. And then it's a state that is in the lead, if you want to put it that way, in the demographic decline. So it's really the upper Midwest and New England states that are seeing that demographic decline at a greater extent than other regions. I mentioned that I was at Tennessee. I was there, University of Tennessee, for 21 years. And when I left, I think we enrolled 23,000 students, and I think they're closing in on 40,000 now.
Wow.
So a lot of growth there. And then our enrollment at Kent State topped out in 2012 right at 42,000 in head count, and we're now at 33,000 head count.
Okay. And that's undergraduate, graduate, online, all of that?
That's right.
Okay.
And we have 9 campuses, so we're regional.
Okay.
We have 8 regional campuses in the Kent campus.
Okay. And in the state of Ohio, how many Division I institutions are there?
Karen, you probably know that more than I do, but it's got to be around the same number, right? It's got to be around 14 or so.
Yeah. So it's hard to distinguish yourself with that moniker, amongst a whole sea of other schools too. We have the same problem in Pennsylvania. We have a lot of small privates. A lot of them are D2 and D3, but we have one institution, Penn State, that seems to sit as the behemoth. And I would imagine you feel in some ways the same thing at Ohio State.
Well, I mean, if you just look at enrollments, Ohio State's around, 67. I think Cincinnati's about 53, and then it's us at about 33. So yeah, it is and for me, it's a change too, Karen, because my career was at Tennessee, which is the flagship university for that state. And then for 2 years, I served as deputy chancellor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, also flagship. Now for the past 14 years, because I was provost before I became president at Kent State, which just has a very different mission. Ours is a history and mission of access. I mean, on the Kent campus, we admit about 86% of the people that apply. Okay. Our regional campuses basically admit anybody with a college degree that applies. And I love that mission. That's what attracted me to Kent State. But it just means that we're different from other institutions in the state. I mean, we're very different. 30 miles away is Case Western Reserve, completely different private university in mission and history than Kent State.
Yeah, absolutely. The disparities are wide. And you mentioned earlier about what we sometimes call the enrollment cliff or the demographic shifting in the United States, where seems to be more population growth in the south and eastern part of the country. population decline, therefore more battling for students and that type of thing. How is Kent State navigating that?
Well, we're laser focused on not running annual deficits.
Okay.
And that means that we've been having to make a whole lot of hard decisions since 2017. So, really, I like to think that I must have been one of the first people to read Nathan Graw's book on the demographic cliff. I remember finishing it on an extremely snowy night in January. And ever since then, we've just been laser focused on delivering year in and year out balanced budgets. But to do that, we have had to exercise a lot of cost reductions and cost control.
And at the same time, the country went through a pandemic. We went through a surplus of federal government funds, COVID relief, that type of thing. Now we're in a period where those funds are gone. And on top of that, we have all kinds of pressure to prove that our value is sustainable and relevant to the age population that we have today. And now you have college athletics in this completely like upside down world where sometimes the athletes are making way more than the coaches and they don't have any obligation to stay with the program and move on. How are you and your team thinking about athletics today?
Well, I mean, if any of your listeners have advice, please feel free to send them to me because, yeah, it's a strange and beautiful world. I mean, you think about the kind of cost controls that we've initiated since 2017, and we've done that in the face of cost growth in intercollegiate athletics. So I've been thinking a lot about this, Karen, lately, because there was, if you think about Alston and before Alston, the NCAA ruling that allowed full cost of attendance and unlimited meals.
Yep.
I mean, when that hit, we're talking roughly 2012, 13, 14, 15. When those changes hit, it was a 10% increase in spending on athletics overnight at Kent State. We had back then about a $20 million athletics budget, and that added $2 million a year to our base expenditures. But that happened, Karen, when we were still a 40,000 student institution. We were still growing in some ways. And so I think the overall impact of that round of cost inflation for intercollegiate athletics wasn't as difficult as this current round. So what I've been thinking a lot about lately, Karen, is that, I just finished reading Brian Alexander's book, Peak Higher Ed.
Yep.
And clearly Kent State is in a post-peak higher ed in terms of we're losing students, our enrollment is declining. Our state funding model in the last 7 or 8 years changed dramatically and has not kept up with inflation. So that's the background. And then in terms of intercollegiate athletics, we have now gone through another wave of cost inflation in intercollegiate athletics, right? So Alston, before Alston, full cost of attendance, unlimited meal plans, boom, a wave of cost inflation. But in a different fiscal environment. Now we're undergoing revenue share, NIL, house, another inflationary environment for higher ed, but now we're in a very different post-peak higher ed environment at Kent State. So if you look at our overall budget as an institution from 10 years ago to now, and you adjust it for inflation, we're a much smaller budget now than we were 10 years ago, but our athletics budget in that same period has grown from roughly 20 million to about 34, 35 million.
Wow.
But that's at the same moment that we have 10,000 fewer students.
Yep.
A different funding mechanism from the state, which has reduced our ability to increase our revenues. What I'm saying, Karen, is the impact of this round of cost inflation in intercollegiate athletics is hitting us at a far different moment as an institution in terms of our finances.
Yeah, I get that. Give our listeners just a quick overview. How is your athletic budget funded? Is it mostly from institutional funds? Is it a balance of, ticket sales, donation? How does that work?
Yeah, we're 60% institutional support.
Okay.
And, this is one of the challenges, isn't it, when you're talking with the general public, is they'll be like, well, our revenues are X. Right. But 60% of those revenues come from me. I always remind people of that. I'm 60% of your revenue. So we're 60%. And in the MAC, I just have to have those numbers in front of me. The MAC ranges from 52% institutional percentage of institutional support, tops out at 80%.
Wow. So you're in a period of declining or reimagined state support. Let me be kind in saying that.
Yeah, fair enough.
Declining enrollment, and the athletic costs are going up, and the institution has been heavily supporting or subsidizing those athletic costs. And now we have NIL, revenue share, the hope that not only will you be competitive for the MAC conference titles, but your teams will advance to the postseason. And I mean, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but as I look at some of the basketball scores across the country, teams that are disparately funded, and I'm going to assume it's because of NIL, but I don't know, are getting not just beaten by a few points, they're getting beaten by 30, 40, 50 points. So the disparity for some of these programs who've had a long history of success in basketball, either on men's or women's side, it feels like it's because of NIL and rev share. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly have a lot of thoughts on growing disparities. I mean, look, I think all of us in higher ed and even in the general public are well aware that there are large disparities between the Power 4 schools and the Group of 6 schools. But now what I'm seeing is a growing disparity within those groups.
Yeah.
And within conferences. So what I'm noticing now is not just that we have an athletics budget that wouldn't even cover the football coaches' salaries at Ohio State or Tennessee. Like our football budget is less than the head coach's salary at Ohio State. All right. But we're used to operating in that world of disparity. I'm not lamenting that at all. What I am starting to notice and be concerned by is what looks to me like a growing disparity within our league in terms of expenditure growth and then competitiveness, particularly in football, men's basketball, and women's basketball.
So I share your concern. I worked in the Big Ten for 15 years, and I feel like there is a definite split. You have the top 3 or 4 teams, maybe 5 every now and then you have the rest. Now, UCLA this year is upsetting the apple cart. They are doing some great things. So we have to think about the West Coast schools differently. But even within the Big Ten, the best funded conference in the country when it comes to media rights and that type of thing is going to see these disparities. So do you think this is going to force conferences to break apart, realign, more revenue sharing? What do you think? Yeah.
At Kent State, our football coach's salary is right at 1/3 of the largest head football coach's salary in our league. So 1.4 versus right at 500.
Wow.
1.4 million versus 500,000. I mean, our men's basketball coach, and we just increased his salary, is $750, and the highest head coach's men's basketball salary in the MAC is $2 million. Now, what I always struggle with in these conversations, Karen, is I'm not complaining, I'm not blaming these other schools. They are who they are, and they do what they do. But these disparities are now growing. It used to be in the MAC that we were all within about 10% or maybe at most 20% in terms of the lowest athletic budget to the highest, right? 10%, 20%. In fact, that was kind of one of our brands was, we're a conference and we're alike.
Yep.
And our budgets reflect that. But now, if you look at the latest figures, the range is 29 million to 62 million. All right. So at what point do those disparities then lead to your conference schools pursuing different wishes, policies, procedures that are going to lead us to be, I don't know, split apart? I mean, I worry about that a lot. Now, in a post-House world, we can set conference limits, right? That's the thing I think that's underspoken in all the conversation about House.
Yeah.
Is that we can set conference limits. We had a very initial conversation that I brought it up at a president's meeting But, we're not on board because people that are better situated financially in terms of athletics spending than us, I understand why they don't wanna do that. So I get that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I worry about these disparities, and here's something I worry about, Karen, and let me see if I can articulate it. What I worry about is then we will introduce new policies and procedures, and I'm gonna give you a specific example. And then one of the schools that really promotes that change leaves the conference. So, up until a year or so ago, in football, we were an Eastern Division and a Western Division.
Hmm. Okay.
And for the MAC championship, the winner of the Eastern Division played the winner of the Western Division. There was a push made by some of our member institutions to go to one division and the top two schools play in the championship.
Okay.
Now, I didn't support that because my chances of going to the MAC football championship are much greater if there's an Eastern Division that I can win.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But in the end, particularly one institution made a very powerful argument for why we should have just the one division. And it had to do with getting the two top teams into the conference championship game and helping us secure a member in the football championship, the football playoffs. I voted against it, but we voted to do that. And that's democracy. I'm okay. I'm not complaining. But that institution left the league.
Boy. Wow.
So why do we talk about this, or why did I bring this up? Because I'm starting to see these disparities that make me worry about our unity as a conference. And I'm not complaining about that, Karen, because if I were the president of one of those schools, I would be pursuing those policies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in a post peak higher ed environment, that's really hard for us to do at Kent State.
You brought up something that I have rarely heard from certainly some of my guests, that specifically. But I think you've targeted a moment in time where we started thinking less about the collective best interests of our conference and more about how can I position myself in this new world order of conferences to better position our brand, our national exposure, that type of thing. And I'm wondering if this goes back to when the Big Ten started adding teams, right? So we go back about 12, 14 years. Big Ten adds Nebraska, they add Maryland, they add Rutgers. And then we had a quiet period. And then all of a sudden we go to the West Coast and we start thinking about media markets and all those kinds of things. And so the goal became, how do I get on those games on that TV? What do you think about that theory?
Well, I think that's perfectly plausible. I'm sure that has to do with it. I just would add in addition to that, Karen, that the NCAA decision to allow full cost of attendance,
Okay.
unlimited meal plans, the Alston decision, I think that also drove a whole lot of decisions and behaviors that in part then led, I suspect, to some of this movement. Because now you've got to generate more and more revenue to cover your increasing costs. So I think it all goes together.
Gotcha.
I don't know where the independent variable in that is, but I think it's all mixed together.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the evolution of how media is consumed and how much people are willing to pay to watch a game versus how much, media companies are willing to pay a conference to broadcast their games. All of that is changing. What do you think about the slow influence of private credit, private equity, private monies coming from outside the ecosystem that we traditionally think of?
Yeah, there are a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me that understand the world of private equity. Look, my PhD is in Latin American history, Karen. It is not in finance. I'll just say this. We had 10 miles from here was the national corporate headquarters for Joanne Fabrics, and they just went out of business.
Boy.
And pretty clearly, over about a 20-year period, they went out of business because of various private equity maneuvers that just saddled them with so much debt that they went bankrupt. So, I mean, look, I'm a historian of Latin America. Here's my layperson's understanding of private equity. They don't get into it to lose money.
Right. Right.
So I think it'll lead to behaviors that just won't work for others of us in this environment.
I think what I see is, and we've seen now three or four big name institutions kind of create these sidecars, if you will. They're LLCs outside of the traditional university structure. It's supposed to be easier in terms of taxation and writing contracts and that type of thing. Because as you well know, these athletic contracts, whether they're for coaches or staff members or even athletes, are getting more and more complex. And so to have that kind of expertise on staff is difficult. But what I'm worried about is what you just said, is that let's say I outsource my all my revenue producing parts of my athletic department, so my ticketing, my sponsorships, my in-game advertisement, all those things. And all those people leave my employment. They're not employees of Kent State anymore. They're employees of whatever external company. And then that external company decides hiring people that don't necessarily fit the culture of what I want to create on campus. They don't really understand what the mission and vision of higher education comes in. How much more then do we see a separation of how athletics operates and whether it's consistent with what you want the mission of your school to be?
So I think my answer to that gets to why do we have athletics, intercollegiate athletics at Kent State University?
Yep.
And so I've been thinking a lot about that. I mentioned I'm historian of Latin America. Really, my specialty is Brazil. And you know this, Karen, there are maybe no other countries on the planet that have this level of athletics
Yeah,
incorporated into their universities. Now, there's a
definitely.
couple of Canadian universities that are NCAA members. I think maybe one in northern Mexico. But
Right.
really, ours is a singular approach in the entire world when it comes to intercollegiate athletics. So why do we do this at Kent State? Well, I think we do it I've been thinking lately for two primary reasons. One is athletics is a way for us, and those events are a way for us to bring together people in our community in large numbers.
Hmm.
So look, we happen to have a fantastic music theater program.
Hmm.
We have award-winning actors and actresses on Broadway that have graduated from Kent State. Our graduates tend to get hired fairly quickly in national productions and on Broadway, and we will sell out, and just did 9 performances of our spring musical. Altogether, the attendance in those 9 performances is half of what the attendance was for the most recent men's basketball game against Akron.
Interesting.
And especially in our climate, and especially in the winter, it's a way
Yeah.
to bring large numbers of us together in a community. So for me, that's one reason we have intercollegiate athletics at Kent State. And then a second reason is it consistently brings to your campus about 400 individuals, student athletes, who excel in leadership, who excel in time management, who excel in all the things we want them to excel in to then succeed in life after graduation. We just had our Kent State Athletics Hall of Fame induction ceremony last weekend, and the inductees ranged from an Olympian discus thrower to a gymnast who's now really leading the way in the treatment and research on the treatment of breast cancer. So, I mean, that's why we have intercollegiate athletics.
Yeah.
But at Kent State, we don't have intercollegiate athletics because it's the primary driver of our brand and who we are.
Okay.
And it's not going to be that. So at some point, a whole lot of decisions will have to be driven by that. And if you think about it, we can meet the benefits of intercollegiate athletics as I just laid it out. It doesn't have to be at any particular level. Right? As long as we're having these athletic events and they're drawing people and we're drawing very talented individuals. So, look, I've been at a P4 university. I was the faculty athletics representative at a P4 university. And man, and I was at Tennessee, and man, all hats off to Tennessee because they know how to do it. And I
Yeah.
learned so much as faculty athletics representative from Mike Hamilton, who was the athletic director then, from John Curry, who was second in charge, who's now the athletic director at Wake Forest, from Desiree Reed Francois, who's now the athletic director at Arizona. I mean, this was like a master class in leadership, right? I mean, I call on those lessons learned all the time as a president. That's who they are. That's not who we are. The challenge is we are lumped together in the same division and in the public's mind, but
Yes.
I can't operate like those folks. It's not
Yeah.
not possible, and private equity would be one example of that.
I struggle now. I just don't think that the designations that were created 40 years ago, 45 years ago, of divisions 1, 2, and 3, and whatever the ideas were back then of division 3 being small privates, division 2 kind of being mid-sized programs, and division 1 being something else, large publics. Are the membership in those groups looks nothing like that anymore. And I'm really wondering if, in fact, those designations are still valuable in this era. If you could reimagine how this might be constructed, what do you think might it look like?
I always joke, Karen, that as a historian, I'm great at predicting the past, not so good at predicting the future. And I'll say this, I would say up until about 18 months ago, I was pretty all in on thinking that I had a recipe for how we should maneuver, change, alter, do things in this new world. But but actually I think recent changes have really outpaced that
Mm,
certainty in my own mind. And
yeah.
honestly, Karen, right now, I just think we just have to kind of tread water and see what's going to happen, how it all shakes out. So, you asked me what my ideal scenario is. I guess I could come up with it, Karen, but it doesn't really matter what my ideal scenario is. I think we're going to have to just be ready for some pretty big changes. And then how we respond to those changes really has to be driven by who we are
Yeah.
and not who we think we are. I read once a book. It wasn't a very good book. I don't remember the title. It was How to Succeed in Academia book. It really wasn't very good. But I remember one takeaway from that book, which is one of the first things a president has to do when they take a job at a new institution is to explain to that community that they aren't who they think they are.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
so we just have to, as all this shakes out, we just always have to be tethered to who we are and who we are in reality and not just in our past beliefs about who we were or how things operated. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I could come up with a nice ideal scenario. I think it'll be obliterated pretty quickly by what actually happens. I've got to believe that some major changes are coming
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of the FBS, FCS, Division 1, 2, and 3. I just have to imagine some big changes are.
Yeah, it feels like it's just not working for much of anybody, and nobody likes the uncertainty and nobody likes the costs going up and that type of thing. Well, I often think about how presidents help their boards understand this new landscape. How do you help your board understand this new landscape?
Well, first of all, I mean, we just have an amazing board. So they're really well informed about all matters, higher education. And then a couple of members were student athletes. A couple of members are in the legal profession that have as clients
Okay.
higher educational institutions. So we probably have a better informed board than most. But look, I mean, I always call it the magical power of football.
Hmm.
And I always get sucked into the magical power of football too. I mean, I love college athletics. And I love let's take football. I love that. I love football. But it can lead you to get into kind of some emotional decision makings
Definitely.
that just don't reflect good business practices or
Yeah.
violate sort of good business plans that you would draw up. So I personally am fortunate. I don't have to try to educate a board on these things. And yet they, and most importantly, me as well, we all are under the spell of the magical power of football. And,
So true.
I used to say that when I was at Tennessee, you could get certain things done with the state or not done with the state, or certain things done and change initiatives internally or not, depending on how the football team was doing. So
Yeah.
it's a real powerful influence, and it's a powerful influence over the general public. I get that. I love college athletics. We need to be careful not to be driven by the brand and the realities of people who in the end are not like us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a real need to help people understand that it's likely not going to go back to the way it was. I think people who pine for the good old days are probably barking up the wrong tree, to use another analogy.
Well, I find myself saying to folks pretty regularly, I personally don't like the way things are operating right now, but that's the way they're operating right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now I can try to get out of that, but getting out of that would mean what, Karen? It would mean leaving a league, I guess, that we've been in since in the early 90s. I think we joined the MAC in 52. And I think this is another aspect of intercollegiate athletics that maybe a lot of people don't understand is that when you're in a league, you're in a league and now you're dealing not just with other institutions,
Mhm.
but think about this. You're dealing with institutions that are located in different states
Yes.
that operate under different funding models.
That's right.
I mean, think about the MAC right now, Karen. I mean, you got uber blue states, right? Now we got California with Sac State. You got University of Buffalo. You
That's
got
right.
UMass. I used to work at UMass.
Right.
Those are like as blue as you can get. And then you look at all the Ohio schools and Ball State and Indiana. That's about as red as you can get.
Yep.
And then I guess you would say that the Michigan schools, Western, Central, Eastern, are in a purple
Yeah.
state.
Yeah. Wow.
And so the funding mechanisms are different. And then not to mention nationally, Karen, I mean, I'm from Kansas. I'm a native of Kansas. The Kansas legislature will periodically devote funding to athletic facilities.
Okay.
I think I read the other day that the state of New Mexico in their budget is giving some money to New Mexico State and New
I see
Mexico.
that. Yes.
So my point here is that it's not just about what I want to do. I got to be in an association with other people.
Yeah.
So unless I want to be independent, and that's just a road to nowhere, I need to be with other schools, but these other schools all operate in different environments. It just it
Great
adds to
point.
a level of complexity.
It's a great point. And that's why some people are excited about the regionalization aspect of maybe you keep football and a couple other sports as national schedules, but you regionalize your other sports just to try to create some sanity in your spending and that type of thing.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
So instead of sending your soccer team out to play preseason Stanford, Berkeley, and UCLA, you play Penn State and you play Maryland and you play West Virginia, and those
Yeah.
are all easy bus rides for
Yeah.
us. So yeah,
Exactly.
totally.
Exactly. Yeah. Todd, if I have somebody who's thinking about becoming a college president at a school like Kent State, what do you want them to understand about the challenges of the job today when it comes to athletics?
Well, let me first of all say that just being a college president is the best job I've ever had in my life. So I'm now finishing up my 7th year. I've signed up for 3 more years. It's just the best job. And it's the best job when I'm standing there at commencement and I'm watching people graduate. That's really why it's the best job. It's the best job because literally yesterday, which was a Sunday, my server at a restaurant is a current Kent State student. And then I went into a store and the person that helped me is a current Kent State
Cool.
student. I have my healthcare, my physicians are all at the Cleveland Clinic. I mean, there are so many Kent State nursing graduates at the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
So first of all, what I would say is in general, it's the best job in the world. I mean, in terms of advice about athletics, you're going to have to decide where your lines in the sand are. And your line in the sand as a new president might be different than the line in the sand of your donors and your trustees. So I would say don't be rash in trying to make a whole lot of changes when you start out. And then just really help yourself and help others understand who you are as an institution and
Yeah.
come up with markers of that so that it's not just talk, right? So it's, what's a marker? Well, we say we're an access institution. Well, what's your evidence for that? Well, we admit 86.5% of the students apply to our Kent campus and 100% of the high school graduates that apply to our regional campuses. To me, that's a pretty good indicator that we're
Yeah.
an access institution. In that case, then the way we act might be different than Syracuse,
Hmm.
might be different and will be different than Stanford. So I guess my advice then, as it comes to athletics, is think about what's possible. Try to put yourself in the position of others. So I understand that the world that I occupy is different than the world that my colleague at Tennessee occupies, but it's also different than my colleague at UMass occupies.
Hmm.
And be mindful of that.
Yeah.
And then I think a final piece of advice I would have is there's something about athletics that you can have spreadsheets and you can have business plans and you can have data. And then at some emotional moment, poof,
It blows up.
it blows up. And it blows up when you're hiring a
Yep.
coach.
It's so true.
And it blows up when you're negotiating a television contract. There are just key moments where all of that goes out the window.
I know.
And then it
Yeah.
feels like the decisions are made at warp speed after they haven't been made for years and they don't follow a business plan.
I agree 110% on that. I've seen that too many times to say, nope, can't believe that for a second. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me and my listeners to add your voice to the conversation that's really thinking hard about the future of athletics on our campuses and how it aligns with our mission. I appreciate you.
Well, this has been a real pleasure for me. I listen to your podcast when I'm out on my slow jogs,
Thank
and
you.
it's always a good companion. So thank you for what you do, Karen.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay.